What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty Peak here with another episode of Steelers Touching Under on our Steelers War Room series that focused on putting you in the minds of O.Khan, Mike Tomlin, Andy Weidl, and the rest of the Steelers front office as they put together a winning roster in 2024 and beyond, and hopefully a roster that will compete for a 7th Lombardi trophy. All right, it's good to be back with you guys. There's been a lot of global Steelers global perspective content out. A little bit less on my War Room series content that I do alone. Global perspective, obviously, with my co-host Shannon White, if you're new to the channel. It's been a crazy time. It has been a very, very crazy time. It's been a crazy time for the world. I've been going through a new job process. So I'm finishing up with my old job. I also, in the last week, have been caught up in the big IT outage, both in the old job and in my new job. Both clashed, together in the mix of that. So keeping aware of what's happening in the company I'm going to. Also, trying to address things that I can in the company that I'm in right now. So it has been a crazy week, but it's actually been a crazy sort of 6 weeks. I've been doing business travel, all the rest of it. So I appreciate everyone, all our subs and regular listeners. If you're not a sub, think about hitting that sub button, hit that like button if you like this show throughout it. But I know you guys, it's been a little bit quiet the last couple of weeks from us compared to our usual cadence. Probably like we've averaged 4 or 5 shows rather than a show a day. We will pick that cadence back up. But it's also been quiet for the Steelers as well. Obviously, training camp kicks off in a couple of days' time. It's going to be awesome. Going to have a lot more to come as we roll out through training camp. But with all that being said, on today's show, what did I want to talk about? Well, I actually got inspiration for this one. It's kind of the theme for what this one's going to be. And it's something that we sort of talk about through the free agency process, through the draft process, in different conversations, whether it's during a live show or whether it's during a particular theme that I might put out there, or that Shannon and I talk about in the global perspective content. But it was raised by a commenter, and I think he's a sub of the channel as well, but a guy called Jeff Hewitt in the comments a couple of days ago. And he asked a really interesting question, which was, what do you guys think about the preference for drafting young players for the D-line? It doesn't seem to make sense developing these players and then paying to keep them versus drafting older, more developed guys versus drafting older, more developed guys that can contribute quicker and have more maturity. Plus, isn't the older prospect generally a bargain at the draft? So that was kind of interesting because you think about Cam Hayward, and it took him a couple of years to adjust, even though he was a first-round pick out of Ohio State. But it goes back to a wider discussion point around which players do you need to draft and draft highly and maximize through the rookie deal, and which players provide value in free agency. And that's what I thought we'd look at today. Now, when Shannon and I have talked about this before, loosely on the global perspective, we've talked about things like D-line, wide receiver, cornerback, depends a lot of the time, edge rusher. They're expensive guys in free agency. So letting guys go and then spending high draft picks kind of makes sense, because otherwise, and you're giving up, in some cases, over $30 million now in your cap. And that doesn't even include what you're paying in the quarterback. So I thought we'd go position by position through both. We'll have a look at the Steelers in terms of the top paid guys and where to spend the money. And then we'll look at how that translates to the rest of the league, because there are positions where the discrepancy is really, really big. And I guess why this is important for where the Steelers are at right now is that we need to see in training camp guys step up in these roles, because the problem, and you'll see this particularly with the defensive line, which is why I wanted to do it off the back of Jeff's comment on one of our recent defensive shows, is the Steelers have to really figure out this defensive line. That was what Shannon and I talked about the last week, about one thing that needs to improve. But I talked about sacks, and he talked about pressure and a playmaking defense. The defensive line is a good example for the Steelers of where they've spent decently high picks, but maybe not enough. And if they can't find the resolution, like if they can't get the most out of those guys in the next year or two, particularly if Benson can't really prove he's there to take the mantle of Ogunjobi, or even one day, hopefully, Cam Hayward, then the Steelers are going to have to spend a pretty high pick going back there again. So let's crack into it. What I thought I would start off with is the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Obviously, that's the team we all go for. That's this channel, Steelers Touching Under. So cap number this year, TJ Watt, for those you can see on the screen, obviously some people listen in their cars and on trains and buses and all this other stuff. So TJ Watt's cap million this year is 30, cap number is 30 million, or just over 30, almost 30 and a half. Cam Hayward, 22 million. What I talk about that this offseason. 21.5 million almost for Minka, 13.283 for Ogunjobi. Defensive lineman, obviously. James Daniels is 11.1. Isaac Seumalo is 10.1. Cole Holcomb is 7.6, which is interesting. Highsmith is at 6 million, but he had a restructure on his deal. Patrick Queen's at 6 million. His deal's more backloaded. Then Dante Jackson at 6 million, but that's actually going to come. His cap number came down because of the signing bonus with the way they did that. And Nate Herbig at 5.46 million. This is why I think Nate Herbig is on the roster bubble, whether a cut or a trade. Then you got Chris Boz, Wizard of Oz. Then you've got Atlanta Roberts at 4.66 million, Najee Harris at 4.151 million, Kazi, which again, you're in the copper dead cap hit of 875,000. Kazi could be a roster bubble as well. And mind you, the Steelers have obviously got over $15 million in cap space still. I think it's 15.9. Yeah, almost 16 million. But they over this course, they could literally save themselves 7 million more and make it 22 million. But let's go back and look at these positions. Edge rusher, defensive lineman, defensive safety, defensive lineman, left guard, right guard, middle linebacker, edge rusher. This is pretty cheap. What's missing? Top expensive wide receiver, because Steelers' best wide receiver is George Pickens on a rookie deal. Quarterback, obviously Russell Wilson's getting paid the minimum. Justin Fields is on minimum because he's had the money guaranteed as part of that rookie deal still with the Bears. The Steelers also from a cornerback position, their best cornerback outside Dante Jackson's obviously here in the top 10 players. But then it's Joey Porter Jr., who's it will be a second year, on second year of his rookie deal this year, second year player. And when you look at then otherwise, the other defensive guys, they're all young as well. So the Steelers have a really interesting cap situation this year, which is going to be a bit different to a lot of other teams, where there's a large conglomerate of guys spread between like Kazi at 4 million and all the way up to TJ Watt at 30 million. There are other teams that have a number of guys in that plus 18 million bucket. But the Steelers at the same time have their dead cap hit this year so far at the moment is, I think it's 18. Yeah, $24 million. They're $24 million. So that's kind of one of the key differences here. $24 million in cap space. 5.83 for Deontay, 4.613 for Trubisky, 3.7 for Kenny, 3 for Okorafor, 3 or just under 3 for Patrick Peterson, just under 2 for Allen Robinson, 1.5 for Mason Cole, almost $500,000 for Keanu Neal, and Kedrick Green still sitting there with dead cap hit based on when they moved him on through that trade. So I just want to show you that because I think where it's interesting to sort of say there is that could be another expensive position. It also, that money, if it wasn't so high, could have allowed them to move on from Ogunjobi and sign someone else. Could have meant they could have signed an even better corner. Could have meant a lot of different things. But there's 24 million in dead cap hit that the Steelers, I guess, you're not going to have next year. They're still going to have some dead cap hit. I think the dead cap hit right now is 9 million off the top of my head. But yeah, no, it's not there because it's all with the current load. But that just kind of shows you where they're spending their money. And a lot of it's on the defense. No surprise, the Steelers have the most expensive defense. All right. What if we did it a little bit differently? What if we looked at that, because we talked about Steelers. Let's look at the league overall, and we're going to look at average pay per year, right? At each, we'll go by position. We won't spend loads of time on each position, but I want to talk about this. So quarterback obviously is going to be the most expensive position in the league, right? Which is why having a QB on their rookie deal is so important. Again, you look at this. Even the Packers right now with their deal for Jordan Love are still sitting there at $13.5 million this year, right? Super cheap. Bears, $9.871 million. Commanders, $9 million, right? This is based on QB1, so you can actually show the names. They've slotted them in, right? Versus these, like basically anyone up from the Bills through to the Bengals are paying between $43 million from Josh Allen all the way to Joe Burrow at $55 million, right? Obviously, expensive position. That's why it's helpful to have a guy on a rookie deal. I don't need to labor that point. We all get that. Running back is a position, obviously, where running backs aren't getting paid big second-year deals anymore. Equally, even their rookie deals, because a lot of people are drafting them outside of the first round. That's different. Now, McCaffrey is the outlier with the 49ers, same as Alvin Kamara. Taylor kind of got one of the last bigger deals out of it for a running back. Barkley's obviously on a short deal there with the Eagles. Then you've got the Packers with Jacobs, after letting Aaron Jones go. Then you go to Mixon with the Texans, and then you start to whittle down. But like for, a top 20 running back in the league and you're paying like $4 or $5 million, fine, right? Not expensive. We know the value. Then we know the value in the running back position is less. Fullback, 49ers with Kyle Juszczyk, and then after that, it pretty much drops off once you get past the Vikings, right? So we're not going to label that point. Wide receiver, obviously, we are experiencing it this year with the Steelers, with having the best wide receiver on their rookie deal, makes it super cheap. In fact, the Steelers are the second cheapest wide receiver number one in the league in George Pickens. So let's see if they've just listed George Pickens, actually. Interesting. They've actually listed Cordell Patterson because of how much they're paying him and how they've done this list. Interesting. But that's a very cheap room, and most people saying Cordell Patterson is the running back, not a wide receiver. But this is based on the money that they're paying, not necessarily who's going to start. Interesting. There's other areas that it's usually done by who starts. Anyway, tight end is a position. Now, this is tight end is an interesting one. I feel like tight ends between these positions of like running back and fullback that are cheap, and then the expensive positions like wide receiver, quarterback when it comes to the offensive side of the football. Talk about offensive lines separately. We're going to break them out from more, the skill positions. But tight end is interesting because you've got expensive tight ends at like with Kelsey at the Chiefs and Hawkinson at the Vikings and Kittle at the 49ers, Dallas Goedert at the Eagles, Mark Andrews at the Ravens, and Njoku at the Browns, having mental blank on the Jags guy, and so on and so forth, right? Now, Freiermuth will be in this list if the Steelers re-sign him. So the Steelers are going to go from the fifth cheapest in the league at tight end number one, and they're going to rocket up the board. But it is interesting. Tight ends are one of these positions where if you can get value in the draft, that's why you think about even with the Raiders where they've got Mayer and they've got Brock Bowers, so, and they've got Harrison Bryant there. Oh, Zach Gentry's on the roster there. But, they've got expensive young guys, but then their wide receiver room is a little bit cheaper. Even though they've got overall, I know they've got Devontae Adams, obviously. So that kind of, it's just interesting. You can get cheap receivers depending on the offense you want to play at tight end. All right, obviously, left tackle, we'll go to left tackle. That is going to be expensive. But again, it shows you at $25 million per year, most expensive left tackle in the league in Laramie Tunsil with his contract there with the Texans. Obviously, the Steelers having Broderick Jones is super helpful. This is where, obviously, really helpful if you had a rookie quarterback. But in this case, with Russell Wilson and his backup being Justin Fields and not even having to pay more between $8 to $10 million for a decent backup, super cheap situation. The Steelers are very unique. It's an anomaly, but still, drafting Broderick Jones makes a position where getting a decent player is going to cost you, like let's say that the Bengals level and above, is going to cost you $16 million. Good work. Look at left guard. Again, still in the 20 millions. Obviously, Rams, we know that with he's playing right guard on the Dotson side of things. The Steelers are in there at the 8 million mark, average pay per year. Remember, it's different. Average pay is by contract split over the years. And obviously, they were with Siamalu, who we know his cap hit this year is a $10.1 million cap hit, 10.191, as we said at the start of the show. So, Steelers again, fairly cheap in this regard, but that's where their veteran is. And they've got the two veterans on the offensive line in Siamalu and James Daniels. Then you go to center. Steelers go way down the pack. They obviously have a second-round draft pick at center. Now, I mean, interesting to actually see how they've laid out the depth chart. Yeah, McCollum, Hardy. Okay, cool. So Zach Frazier's there at 1.8 million. Obviously, center is one of those positions like tight end. In fact, it's probably cheaper than tight end. In the position groups on the offensive line, center will be the cheapest. So if you can get a guy on a rookie deal and you can get a guy that's outside, so it might be outside the top 3 performing centers or the top 3 in demand centers, but if you can keep him, that's going to be really helpful. So it's going to be really interesting how Frazier goes over a 4-year term and how much the Steelers actually need to spend to keep him. That is going to be super interesting when the time comes. Obviously, right guard, moving to right guard, it's quite similar to the left guard situation. Right guard sometimes are paid a little bit less. Again, this is where we see the Steelers having a veteran there is helpful because it's cheaper. It is cheaper to have veteran guards and a center than it is cheaper to have veteran experienced tackle because of how they're in demand. So what the Steelers do by spending high draft picks on tackles 2 years in a row, first round draft picks 2 years in a row, and a second round draft pick on a center, Steelers have done themselves a very big favor in setting themselves up for a cheap offense, but also to spend money if they didn't figure out the quarterback position right. And this is where Weidl and Khan really work their magic. Andy Weidl being like a wizard and Khan being the Khan artist. There is smart money here. Khan is a numbers guy. If I can pull this up, Khan knows it better than Matty P, right? Obviously, he's the GM of the Steelers. You look at right tackle, again, this backs that point. Really expensive with the Lions there. That's Penny Sewell off the top of my head, and they've got other Decker as well. Anyway, that's who they've got listed there. You go right down the list, you get the Steelers with the cheapest right tackle in the league because it's Furtado, only one on the roster. Actually, I want to make sure they've actually listed it as Furtado down there. No, they've listed Jeffrey Hamilton. So that means that they might at left tackle have listed, which is kind of interesting. We'll go here to prove it. Steelers. Interesting that they have not got Furtado in there. They may have. If they've got him in a guard, I'm going to laugh hard because I think one day he will be a guard. Someone's going to comment on that part. Anyway, I know I'm in there. But there we go to the interior defensive line. Now, Steelers obviously really expensive interior defensive line with Cameron Hayward. Average pay per year, they're in the 16.4 million mark. Obviously, this will include Ogunjobi because he'll count for the $9 million, but we know his cap hits higher. Again, this is where it's expensive to buy those free agents, as we've seen with Ogunjobi. It's expensive to retain guys. And so this is where a guy like Benton comes into play. And I think they've listed Benton behind Ogunjobi. No, Dan Larry and Adams. Okay, so they're putting Benton outside of that, maybe inside the edge rusher. That's going to be interesting if they've actually listed him as edge rusher. Let's see that. Sometimes over the cap does some strange things like this. I don't know. Okay, interesting that they've done it like that. Anyway, regardless, the point being is that obviously defensive tackles in like Chandler Jones in the Chiefs instance, obviously Aaron Donald, there's some money still sitting there from the Rams. You look at, the Ravens situation, the Raiders, defensive line is expensive. So you want to be drafting guys that can develop there and play on rookie deals, particularly if you're going to invest in a first-round draft pick and you're going to get that fifth-year option. But you really want that second year to be a real improvement and a third and fourth year to be getting value. We need to see that in Benton's scenario, for example, because defensive line is one of the expensive positions on the defense because of the way that the NFL right now prioritizes interior pressure so much. Now, edge rusher is obviously like wide receiver and corner and quarterback. You're just going to get freaking paid. And the Steelers are paying Highsmith and TJ. They've got Herbie in there, which is a nice, cheap, really, really solid third rotation guy on the pass rush. But obviously it's expensive. And that's, again, why getting a young guy there is really helpful. Herbig could push Highsmith out before his deal's over. Don't be surprised to see that happen if the Steelers need to pay a quarterback. Don't be surprised. Then you go to middle linebacker. Now, this is a position that's like a tight end, like a running back, like a center. It is usually a bit cheaper. Now, we have started to see a trend over the last few years when it's Fred Warner with the 49ers, whether it's Roquan Smith with the Ravens, Tremaine Edmonds with the Bears, Bill's situation. I think that most of the money's tied in Matt Milano now. Steelers obviously with Patrick Queen plus Cole Holcomb. People are starting to pay this position more. So This is why I say it's more like the tight end than running back or center, because I think it's a more it's a position that's getting a bit more expensive and sort of straddles between the most expensive positions and the cheap positions. But it isn't. If you get one of the top 5 to 10 guys in the league, yes, it's going to cost you 10 plus million, almost 15 million a year. If you're getting guys below that, then I guess if you look at a bell curve or you look at like the sliding graph, the number goes down once and changes quite variably. But still, the most expensive and best player at the position in many people's books is only $20 million a year, which is like some of wide receiver 2s are getting paid on some offenses. Likewise, you look at safety. Now, I love Deshaun Elliott for the Steelers. I think he's going to be fantastic. Love Minka Fitzpatrick. Steelers are up there in spending on it. But again, safety is a position, if you've got cheap cornerbacks, you can live with having an expensive safety unit. But you need someone in that defensive back, that secondary unit, to be lights out, to be elite. The thing for the Steelers that's good is we're going to get that with Joey Porter Jr. Unfortunately, we're not going to get a 5th-year option for Joey, so they're going to have to pay Joey earlier than what you'd ideally like, and a cornerback like him is going to be expensive. But Minka will be coming to the end of his deal. You won't have Cam Hayward on the roster by that stage. He will have retired. So the Steelers will have money in their defense. And in fact, you will see probably a shift where the Steelers look to draft a high-round pick at interior defensive line so they can afford to pay their secondary while still paying TJ Watt and maybe having to pay Nick Herbig a bit of contract money. And that's if they don't even try and keep Alex Highsmith, or when they're trying to do an extension on Patrick Queen, etc. So really interesting. The Steelers are going to see a shift in the spending probably from the defensive line and more spending of draft capital. And then you're going to see defensive spend go probably to some of the defensive backs, particularly if Tomlin is still the coach of the Steelers in 3 or 4 years' time as well. And then cornerback, obviously we know that's starting to get expensive now. That creeps up and creeps up and creeps up. Talked about that with Joe Porter Jr. That's a position where drafting someone like, so if Rush or Trice don't work out, I think they're drafting a guy in the 2nd or 3rd round next year. 100%. It'll be like the Roman Wilson pick this shit wide receiver. They'll go and try and back up Joe Porter Jr. with a good solid 3rd round or 2nd round pick. Again, I think defensive line is going to define that. Obviously, also the depth in the draft class, but there's more likely to be depth at cornerback than there is going to be depth at defensive line. But look, that kind of wraps up everything I wanted to talk through. You let me know in the comments, is there a position that you think the Steelers should always prioritize in draft and leave it over free agency? Is there a position that you feel that you should only go after in free agency, don't spend high draft capital on that position? I'd love to know in the comments, because everyone has a different take on this when you go through it. I'm Matty P. As always, go Steelers.